Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to JDB Selects. Round 9 officially in the rearview mirror now, and my gosh, so glad to see the end of it. That was one of the weirdest rounds of rugby league, potentially of all time. Refereeing was subpar, some massive upsets. So let's not waste any time this week and get stuck straight in. Alright, so last week we only tipped 3 out of 8 games, as I just touched on some of the worst refereeing and results of the season so far, potentially all time. Obviously, the Sea Eagles blew a 20-point lead to the Raiders. The Broncos got pumped by the Roosters at home. I did tip the Tigers, but that was pre-Api Coruscant being ruled out, and I obviously couldn't change my tip past Thursday evening. The Storm were pretty lucky, in my opinion, to beat the Titans, but we'll take that. The Cowboys blew another lead, this time against the Dolphins, and the Warriors' poor run of form continued. I mean, you could even argue maybe that the Bunnies had a chance against the Panthers had they not lost so many players to injury. But my word, let's just hope that was a one-off and not a current trend. Good news though, we are still running at 63.8% for the season, so well above average, but obviously a week to forget last week. But as always, we look to bounce back this week. Now, just before we get stuck into the rest of the video, if you do want to support the work that I do in this channel, consider becoming a Patreon member. Not only will you get access to our exclusive members-only Discord channels, you'll also gain the most cutting-edge NRL data tools available on the market. You'll get insights from everything, including head-to-head stats, win percentage with referees, day of the weeks, top 4 teams, bottom 4 teams, all that good stuff, as well as positional try-scoring trends, whether they're conceding a lot on their left or right edge, who each player will be up against each week, and obviously much more. If you do want to become a Patreon member, the link is in the video description. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to the people that have already signed up. It really is people like you that help keep the show on the road. So thank you, and thank you. Now, if you don't know by now, we do run a subscribers tipping comp, so all the details to join are shown on screen. We've got 3 massive prizes this year, so I would encourage everyone that's keen to join now, because the sooner the better. And speaking of the tipping comp, we still have no change at the top, with Manawatu Turbo holding it down with 52 points. But anything can happen over the next 20-odd weeks of the comp. So congrats to you, Manawatu Turbo. Congrats to everyone else in that top 20. And good luck with your tips this week. Let's just not waste any more time and get stuck into my tips. Alright, round 10 gets underway on Thursday night with the 4th placed Dolphins taking on the 5th placed Manly Sea Eagles at Suncorp Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Dolphins, who produced another impressively tenacious performance, reeling in the Cowboys 28 points to 26 in Townsville. The Finns were blown off the park early, but stayed in the fight and rallied late. The experience I thought of Bromwich, Nichols and Kaufusi as well as Stone really showed, and although they were behind on almost every key stat, they managed to defend their line fairly well in the final 10 to 15 minutes. Outside of a few costly errors, I thought Fuller was threatening, and their right side combination of Avarillo and Isako showed their speed when they were given too much space. And in terms of teams list for the Dolphins this week, Kenny Bromwich should return from concussion, and Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow isn't expected back until Magic Round next week. And as for the Sea Eagles, they blew a 20-point lead to the Raiders at home, eventually coming unstuck 24 points to 26. Manly made it look easy for the first 30 minutes before unforced handling errors opened the doors for the Milk, and they were unable to wrestle back momentum. That's now 4 weeks in a row where Manly have given up double-digit leads. They certainly aren't struggling 4 points, but defensively or potentially mentally, they do need to build up some resilience. And in terms of teams list for the Sea Eagles, Ben Trbojevic is close to returning from a hamstring injury and may be available for selection either this week or next. Big Hamoli Olakuatu still has 1 more week to serve on his suspension. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, Manly have won the lone meeting between the two clubs last season by a huge margin, 58 points to 18. The live odds currently have Manly at $1.82 favourites, with the Dolphins coming back at $2.02. The line is very short at 1.5 points, and the over and under is currently 46.5. Very interesting game to start this week. You've obviously got the Dolphins, who are on a bit of a high after some impressive performances, and you've got Manly, who really need to show some fight and bounce back. I think Suncorp's a pretty big factor in this. I know the Dolphins really do enjoy playing in Queensland, but I am going to take the Sea Eagles here. I think the Seagulls have showed, right, they can score plenty of points. If they can shore up their defense and play for a long period of time, for more than 30 to 40 minutes, then they should be too strong for the Dolphins, who really are missing a lot of key players, and have certainly, while they certainly have showed, I guess, a great amount of fight the past, 2 to 3 weeks, I do think that the Sea Eagles can get it done here. So I'm going to take Manly 1-12. All right, moving now to the first of 2 games on Friday night. We're starting first with the 3rd place Penrith Panthers taking on the 8th placed Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs at Bluebet Stadium. All right, the Panthers survived an early scare from the South Sydney Rabbitohs before pulling away late 42 points to 12. It certainly wasn't a clinical performance from Penrith, who made more errors than the Bunnies and were there for the taking in stages of that match. They were able to capitalise on the 2 sin bins and make the Souths pay for some below par effort and defence. And in terms of teams list for Penrith, Isaac Tungo is facing 1 week on the sidelines for that hip drop tackle on Jai Gray. Nathan Cleary was rested last week, but will likely be named to play this week. All right, and as for Canterbury, the Bulldogs were slow off the mark against the Tigers, having enjoyed the bye last week, but managed to warm into the contest and come from behind to win 22 points to 14. The Dogs' attack still left a lot to be desired, but they did show a ton of heart, especially through the middle, and they completed at 92%, which is a massive improvement compared to the 66% they dished up against the Knights last time out. And in terms of teams list for the Dogs, Connor Tracy was a late scratching with a quad injury and will be monitored this week. Apart from that, I'd imagine probably Jacob Preston will rejoin the starting side as well. All right, looking at the 2 sides head-to-head, the Panthers have won 10 of the last 12 meetings. That includes 6 straight. Canterbury have also only ever won 1 game at Bluebet since 2013 and have lost 5 straight at the ground. The bookmakers do agree they have the Panthers at a very short $1.15 favourites, with the Doggies coming back at $5.50. The line is currently 15.5 points. If I'm being honest, I think Dogs plus 15 is a good shout, and the over and under is 39.5 points. Fairly straightforward one for me. I do think the Panthers win, but I'm going to give the Dogs a bit of credit here. I think defensively the Dogs are a much improved side, and the Panthers certainly didn't look to be at their best in the last 2 weeks against the Cowboys and the Rabbitohs. So I am just going to take the Panthers here 1-12, but again, I also wouldn't be surprised if the Panthers pour on the paint late like they did against the Bunnies. So Panthers for me, 1-12. All right, and the final game on Friday has the 12th placed Parramatta Eels taking on the 7th placed Brisbane Broncos at CommBank Stadium. All right, starting first with Parramatta, the Eels had the bye last week, but the week prior were burned late by the Manly Sea Eagles, 32 points to 18. Parramatta were right in that contest and were only down by 2 points after 66 minutes before 2 late sin bins halted any momentum. Ethan Strange showed glimpses of his talent on debut, and he certainly didn't shy away from making contact marking Omole Olakuatu. Penalties really hurt the Eels though, and while the NRL did admit they got some calls wrong, the Eels, they really didn't do themselves any favours either. A few big changes for the Eels this week, with Clint Gutherson undergoing surgery on his knee, and he'll now be out until around round 14, which is obviously a massive loss for the Eels. Mitchell Moses is still a week away at least, and Mike Acevo is free to play this week after escaping the judiciary with only a monetary fine for his elbow on Ruben Garrick. And as for the Broncos, they couldn't avenge their Las Vegas defeat and instead suffered a heavy loss both on the field and off of it, getting pumped by the Roosters 40 points to 18. Brisbane were up against it after losing Ezra Mam temporarily to an HIA and both Jesse Arthurs and Adam Reynolds indefinitely, which obviously caused mass reshuffles to their backline. Despite the blowout though, I thought they fought hard after half-time to get back nearly level with the Roosters, but ultimately weren't good enough on the night. In terms of teams list for the Broncos, Adam Reynolds will be sidelined until at least round 21 with that bicep injury, while Jesse Arthurs isn't expected back until round 16 as he picked up a fractured jaw. Looking at the 2 sides head-to-head, it's been fairly even in recent times, with Parramatta winning 6 of the last 10 games. However, the Broncos, they have won 3 of the last 4. The live odds currently have the Broncos at $1.39 favourites, with the Eels coming back at $3.11. The line is currently 8.5 points, and the over and under is 45.5 points. Fairly straightforward one for me. I know obviously Reynolds is a big loss for the Broncos, but the Eels with no Moses and no Clint Gutherson, surely the Broncos can get it done. So Broncos 1-12 for me. I feel like that's certainty this week. And just before we move on to the next game, if you do want to support the channel, please consider becoming a Patreon member. In return, you get access to some of the best NRL data tools on the market to help you make better informed decisions on the punt. This channel really isn't possible without our Patreon members. If you do want to become a Patreon member, the link is in the video description. Big thank you to all of our current members. Alright, moving now to the first of 3 games on Saturday. We have the 15th placed West Tigers taking on the 11th placed Newcastle Knights at Scully Park. Alright, starting first with the Tigers, they suffered another loss, this time losing to the Bulldogs in a tight one, 22 points to 14. The Tigers looked good early and found their noses in front at the break, but were completely out-enthused in the second half, unable to hold up to the pressure. And while the refereeing was certainly beyond poor in that game, they were lucky not to spend time down a man, with Aiden Caesar avoiding the sin bin for an ugly tackle on Josh Curran. Defensively, the Tigers are much improved, but they just lack points and structure on attack. And in terms of teams list for the Tigers, Aiden Caesar has been handed a 4-game suspension for his tackle on Josh Curran. Api Coruscant is still in doubt though, with Benji Marshall revealing his captain was unable to run at training last week. And as for the Newcastle Knights, they continued their unbeaten run without Kalen Ponga, taking down the Warriors at home in a slippery affair, 14 points to 8. It certainly wasn't a pretty performance from either side, and while the officiating left a lot to be desired, I thought the Knights defended extremely well for long periods of time, only conceding the lone try. Newcastle certainly played to the conditions better, and they did a great job of putting the ball over at the right end of the field. In terms of teams list for Newcastle, a couple of big boosts are expected this week, with both Tyson Frizzell and Jacob Saifiti expected to be available. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Knights, they've won 6 of the last 8 games against the Tigers. The Tigers, they have lost 3 of their last 4 games at Scully Park, including 1 against the Knights in 2018. Ooh, this is a tricky game. I think if Api plays and can play to the best of his ability, I do think the Tigers can beat the Knights here. I certainly have been high on the Tigers for a few weeks now, and they've let me down, and vice versa on the Knights. They've certainly, I've been against the Knights, and they've proved me wrong. So a real danger game for me in my tips this week, but I am going to take the Tigers 1-12. Obviously, keep tabs on teams list tomorrow, and if I do make any changes to my tips, you do need to be a Patreon member to get access to that. So if you are keen to see if any tips change, jump in that Patreon now. Alright, moving now to the second game on Saturday, we have the 13th placed St. George Illawarra Dragons taking on the 17th placed South Sydney Rabbitohs at Netstrata Jubilee. Starting first with the Saints, the Dragons couldn't back up Flano's fighting words, losing to the Sharks 20 points to 10. While the conditions were far from ideal, the Saints failed to complete sets and struggled to get to their kick, and when they did, they weren't able to pin Cronulla down their own end. The Dragons were fatigued through a ton of defending and made 14 errors at crucial times. They really tried to go through the Sharks' middle, and maybe they may have found more success if they'd moved the ball around. In terms of teams list for the Dragons, Moses Sully is expected back from concussion this week, and Luciano Leilua is also expected to be available for selection if required. And as for the Rabbitohs, their downward spiral continued, capping off their week where they fired their head coach with a heavy 40-12 point defeat at the hands of the Penrith Panthers. I really do feel sorry for South as they started that game really strong. Then obviously they lost their fullback and halfback, which caused major positional reshuffles, and 2 blatantly avoidable sin bins rubbed out any momentum and belief. Some of the tries they conceded were really poor, and towards the end of the game it certainly seemed like the team had mentally conceded. There really isn't much light at the end of the tunnel for the South Sydney Rabbitohs in the foreseeable future. Alright, and in terms of teams list for the Bunnies, Latrell Mitchell returns from suspension this week and was tipped to play in the centres, but given the injury to Jai Gray, he'll likely wear the number 1 jersey. Big news this week too is Cam Murray is out with a hip pointer injury. Dean Hawkins went down with quad injury, which means we'll probably see maybe Jack Whiten named at 5'8", and Cody Walker moving into halfback. Alex Johnson is also tipped to return from his hamstring injury this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Rabbitohs have a really strong record over the Dragons. They've won 18 of the past 23 meetings. That includes 9 of the last 11. The live odds currently have the Dragons at $1.64 favourites, with the Rabbitohs coming back at $2.27. The line is currently 2.5 points. Ooh, I'm going to take the Dragons in this one by 1-12 points. I was tempted to tip the Rabbitohs until I heard that Cam Murray went down with injury. I think the Bunnies, they've looked poor with a full-strength side, so I can't imagine how they'll look this week, missing some of their best and key players. Dragons have been great at stages this year, and obviously bounced back well at home. So for me, Dragons 1-12. All right, and the final game on Saturday is the top of the table showdown between the second place Melbourne Storm and the first place Cronulla Sharks at AAMI Park. Starting first with the Storm, they were pushed right to the final minute by the Gold Coast Titans, hanging on to win 22 points to 20. Melbourne looked menacing early, scoring 4 tries in just over 10 minutes, however didn't trouble the scorers from the 33rd minute onwards. Defensively, they managed to hold on but did miss twice as many tackles as the Titans and could probably count themselves lucky that a few calls went their way late. In terms of teams list for the Storm, Ryan Papenhuyzen suffered a small fracture to the fibula and will be sidelined for an extended period of time. Suafa-Alongo also went down with a knee injury and is in doubt this week. Good news though is Xavier Coates and Tui Kamikamica are both expected back this week. And also one thing to note, Craig Bellamy revealed that Jerome Hughes played through a calf injury, so that's certainly something to watch out for again this week. And as for the Sharks, they retained their top spot on the ladder with a gritty win over the St. George Illawarra Dragons in the local derby, 20 points to 10. They were made to fight and showed great resilience to come from behind, spearheaded by their starting forward rotation of Capleton and Kaufusi. After multiple weeks of blowing teams away, it was great to see the Sharks show some tenacity and determination to hang in the contest, bide their time, and win through some good, structured football. And in terms of teams list for the Sharks, no new injuries are expected this week, so I'd expect the same 17 to be named. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Storm, they have won 6 of the last 7 against the Sharks. They also have an incredible record at AAMI Park against Cronulla, winning 12 of the 14 games played at the venue. The bookmakers currently have the Storm at $1.47 favourites, with the Sharks coming back at $2.69. The points line is currently 5.5, and the over and under is 43.5 points. Ooh, should be a good game this. Obviously, the winner will move into top spot on the ladder. And I know the stats heavily favour the Storm, but I'm going to take the Sharks in this one 1-12. I think I've been pretty critical of the Storm all season so far. And while they certainly have won games, they haven't been convincing. And the Sharks have. And I know the Sharks have had an easier draw. Don't get me wrong. This will be the real test for Cronulla. But I am going to back them here. Based on form, I do think the Sharks have played better football. So for me, Cronulla to break the hoodoo, 1-12. All right, moving now to the first of 2 games on Sunday, starting first with the 6th placed Sydney Roosters hosting the 14th placed NZ Warriors at Allianz Stadium. Starting first with the Roosters, they continue their sublime run of form, beating the Brisbane Broncos at Suncorp 40 points to 18. The Chooks have really turned it up a notch recently, scoring 100 points over the last 2 weeks and blew through the Broncos late. Even more impressively though, they did it without Smith, Radley and Tupou, who are all expected to return this week. The other big news for the Roosters this week is Spencer Leniu will also make his return from suspension and will no doubt want to make up for lost time. And as for the Warriors, they suffered their 3rd straight loss and have now been held winless for the entire month, going down to the Knights 14 points to 8. The Wars have historically struggled in wet conditions, and last week was no different, coughing up possession and making basic errors. They had plenty of chances to win that game and couldn't find their groove on attack, even with a contentious penalty try call going against them. Big news too is Kurt Capewell left the field with a calf injury, so will be in doubt this week. Freddie Lussick, though, he returns from suspension, and Paul Roach should be available if required. And looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Roosters have won 7 straight against the Warriors. They've also won 7 of the last 10 home games against the boys from NZ. Alright, as much as it does pain me, I am going to take the Roosters here by 1-12. I do think the Warriors can put up a bit, well, I'd like to believe the Warriors can put up a bit of a fight, so I am just taking the 1-12 margin. But yeah, I think given current form, the Roosters should be too good at home. Alright, and the final game of round 10 has the 16th placed Gold Coast Titans taking on the 10th placed North Queensland Cowboys at Cbus Super Stadium. Starting first with the Titans, they almost managed back-to-back wins, narrowly losing to the Melbourne Storm 20 points to 22. The Gold Coast fought hard to get back into that contest and actually led the Storm on almost every key stat except the scoreboard. It was another game that was marred by a couple of contentious calls that went both ways, but you've got to give the Titans credit for the way that over the past month they've managed to fight their way back into games. And while their record is 1-7, it certainly does feel like they've turned the corner. And in terms of teams list for the Titans, Tanner Boyd suffered a dislocated wrist, so will be sidelined this week. Mo Fotuaika is expected back from concussion, while Jaden Campbell is named to return next week. And as for the Cowboys, they produced a vintage North Queensland performance, starting strong and fading late against the Dolphins, 28 points to 26. The Cowboys started fast and were red hot on attack before their lack of defense came back to bite them for the fourth week in a row. I really don't have too much to say about the Cowboys this week, guys. I mean, they are so flimsy on defense. They're so strong on attack, but my word, they need to find something and find it fast. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, fairly even in recent years. However, the Titans, they've won 3 of the last 4 games against the Cowboys at Seabus. Ooh, interesting game here. You've got a Gold Coast Titans side who may not have won, but have certainly found a bit of form. And you've got a Cowboys side that haven't won in 4 weeks, desperate to bounce back. I mean, geez, this is a Sunday pooslinger if ever I've seen one. But I'm going to take the Cowboys 13+. I know that is brave, but I really do think the Cowboys can put some hurt on the Titans. And to me, that line, what's the line? It's a 3.5 points. Cowboys points line, 3.5. I'm lapping that up too. I think the Cowboys win and win well. So Cowboys 13+ for me. Bang, and just like that, we are done for another week. Thank you as always for watching. If you are new here, leave a like on the video, hit subscribe, join our free Discord, consider becoming a Patreon member. Let me know your tips and predictions in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.